Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all for coming. Today we are reintroducing the Respect for Marriage Act, our bill to repeal the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, and to send that shameful law into the history books where it belongs. When Congress passed DOMA in 1996, it was not possible for a gay or lesbian couple to marry anywhere in the world. Today, tens of thousands of gay and lesbian couples are legally married. Far from harming the institution of marriage, these couples have embraced this time-honored tradition and the serious legal duties of civil marriage. These couples pay taxes, serve their communities, struggle to balance work and family, raise children, and care for aging parents. They have undertaken a serious public and legal pledge to care for and support each other and their families. And their contributions and needs are no different than anyone else's. Yet DOMA treats them as complete strangers under federal law. This defies common sense and harms thousands of married couples who are denied federal responsibilities and rights, including access to programs like Social Security, that other couples can count on when they marry. This is utterly indefensible. DOMA cannot survive even the lowest level of judicial scrutiny, and it has already been declared unconstitutional by a federal court. Bob Barr, the lead sponsor of DOMA back in 1996, has denounced the law and called for its repeal, as has former President Clinton, who signed DOMA into law. The President and Attorney General Holder have concluded that DOMA is unjustifiable, unconstitutional, and indefensible. But we should not wait for the courts to beat us to the punch. The responsibility for DOMA lies with Congress, and the time for dumping this shameful law is long overdue. Rather than prolonging litigation in the courts, Congress should repeal DOMA now and bring an end to the harm it causes gay and lesbian families each and every day. The Respect for Marriage Act, which we are reintroducing, does exactly that. It will strike DOMA from the books and ensure a uniform national policy of stability and security for families and for the federal government. It restores our past practice of respecting state-sanctioned marriages for purposes of federal law, while at the same time allowing each state to determine its own marriage laws. The Respect for Marriage Act already enjoys the support and the co-sponsorship of 108 members of the House, including Democratic leaders Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer. And I'm thrilled to announce that Senators Feinstein, Leahy, and Gillibrand will introduce the bill in the Senate later today, along with almost 20 co-sponsors. We are also grateful for the continued collaboration and leadership of the many advocacy organizations that have brought us here. We are very fortunate to be joined today by some of their leaders, including Joe Salmonese with the Human Rights Campaign, Evan Wolfson of Freedom to Marry, Chris Anders from the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, Lanae Erickson of Third Way, Ray Carey, National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, Richard Socarides of Equality Matters, Josh Turnham, People for the American Way, Michael Wilson, Americans for Democratic Action, Rick Jacobs, Courage Campaign, Sam Chu, California Faith for Equality. Have I missed any organizations? Okay. And later in the program, I will introduce some of the people doing pioneering legal work on this issue and the brave individuals they represent. I am confident that with a president who is committed to repealing DOMA and a broad, diverse coalition of Americans on our side, we can and will dump DOMA once and for all. I would now like to recognize a hero and lifelong leader in the fight for equality and the leading voice for the LGBT community in Congress, my colleague from Massachusetts, Representative Barney Frank.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for your leadership from your critical role in the Judiciary Committee. The most interesting thing about this, and people are going to ask you if we're being too optimistic, but one of the things that people ought to note is the great duck that we just saw from the Speaker of the House. When the President thoughtfully, courageously declined to defend DOMA, and we ought to be very clear that it wasn't just a declination to defend DOMA in court. it was linked to their very important decision that henceforth the position of the U.S. government will be that anything that discriminates based on sexual orientation will be subject to the same scrutiny that involves discrimination based on gender. That is a major breakthrough in terms of a recognition of the importance of defending this. And of course they were linked because it is one thing to defend DOMA when all you have to do is spell it right. It is another when you have to give it any substance. And what the administration is now acknowledging is that there is no substantive arguments that can be made. But what then happened was it fell to the House of Representatives or the Senate to decide to step in. It is to the credit of Senator Reid and the Democratic senators that they are not doing that. But what's interesting is that there were two ways in which Speaker Boehner could have proceeded. He could have put this to a vote of the House. Under our rules, in fact, any member of the House could have offered a privileged resolution mandating that the House step in. Instead, he ducked that. He had the 5-member committee, which is the 3 Republican leaders and the 2 Democratic leaders, the majority and the minority, make the decision. And I was interested to read a comment from one of the opponents of same-sex marriage who said they were glad that he did that because if there had been a vote in the House on whether or not to proceed with the defense, it would have shown a substantial erosion in support from DOMA from when it first passed. So no one should think that we are being unduly optimistic. We don't have the votes right away, but the movement is clearly in our direction. And what has basically happened is that reality has once again triumphed over prejudice. The arguments against same-sex marriage, now that we've had the reality, have proven to be so flimsy and so inaccurate that we are where we are today. Now, unfortunately, in politics, even the most inherent implausibility is not automatically self-refuting, but it helps. And I would just say again that the fact that Speaker Boehner would not put his membership in this, and let me close with this. Some of us were here a few years ago when the Republicans last controlled the majority, and you will remember that they repeatedly put the constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage to a vote, even when it was clear that it wasn't going to get the votes, because they were eager to give their members a chance to vote against same-sex marriage. Today, they are eager to protect their members from having to vote against same-sex marriage. And that's progress. We're not quite there, but it's important to note it.
Thank you, Barney. I would now like to introduce a tremendous leader on every LGBT issue in Congress, my good friend, Representative Tammy Baldwin.
Thank you, Jerry. I wanted to start by acknowledging your hard work and your incredible staff's hard work on this legislation. Those of us who have been fighting the battle to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act since practically it became law have long known that we have fairness and justice on our side. Now, after years of educating and agitating, it is heartening to know that we have also the American public on our side. The recently released HRC-sponsored poll shows that Americans oppose DOMA 51 to 34, and even more voters, 54%, oppose the House Republican move to defend the Defense of Marriage Act in court. Repealing DOMA is important symbolically and substantively. Now that we have repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the Defense of Marriage Act remains the only example of overt discrimination against gays and lesbians written into our federal statutes. When the laws of our nation declare us somehow less than, it sends a message that we are somehow less than, and we are not. But substantively, DOMA harms real Americans. It harms children and their loving parents. It harms elderly, lifelong partners. And it harms widows and widowers. 14 years ago, an openly gay Wisconsin Republican, asked the GAO to count all of the rights and responsibilities that the federal government confers based on marriage. Former Congressman Steve Gunderson learned that over 1,000 rights and responsibilities were conferred based on marriage. Today, that number is even higher. All I am trying to say is that repeal of DOMA matters, and it is the best of family values. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. It's now my pleasure to introduce someone from our western flank, a great progressive voice for justice, Representative Jared Polis.
Thank you, Representative Nadler, for bringing forward this bill. Again, it's high time that at the federal level we finally repeal the Defense of Marriage Act. This is an issue where the American people, the culture of our country, has moved ahead of the politicians here in Washington. State after state have acted to allow marriages between people of the same sex, and yet our federal government continues to not recognize those legal marriages in those states. You know, marriage is a very personal institution to many people, and no one is saying that certain faiths should marry certain people. They don't have to. You certainly don't have to consider a friend or loved one married if you don't want to. Every different faith has different rules about who can marry. Many faiths don't marry people of different faiths to a member of that faith. Many major faiths in this country don't marry people who are divorced, allow them to remarry. And yet those are all personal decisions that, of course, have implications within the religious context of marriage. But where we fall down as a country on this issue is when we conflate the religious definition of marriage with the legal definition of marriage. Anybody in this country should be able to get divorced before the law. You're not locked into a marriage for life. Now, whether you are divorced or not in the eyes of your faith is your own business. You can choose a different faith. You can be a member of that faith and not be divorced. It's between you and your church and your God, just as whether you consider a marriage between two members of the same sex to be valid. No one is saying that any particular faith has to consider that to be valid, and many won't, and some will, and that's all fine. But what the Respect Marriage Act does is repeal the Defense of Marriage Act. It ensures that there is legal recognition for marriages that are legally defined in states that allow same-sex marriage. This is a critical real-life issue for gay and lesbian families across the country, whether it's gay and lesbian families, multinational couples facing immigration issues, whether it's families with kids, whether it's dealing with end-of-life issues, whether it's the very important tax implications of survivorship and estate, or many of the other rights that go along with marriage. It's high time that Congress acted and cleanly repealed the Defense of Marriage Act, allowing states their traditional prerogative in defining what marriage means within their borders, and to further the cause of defining marriage in a non-discriminatory way that allow those of us who want to marry members of the same sex to do so as it is legal in our states, and the federal government would recognize those marriages. So while Jerry Nadler is leading the way in Congress, this is simply a matter of Congress catching up with where state after state and where the country and where our society is going towards fairness and equality before the law for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. And now please welcome the newest member of our team, the one who already has a great record of fighting for equality, Representative David Cicilline of Rhode Island.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by thanking Congressman Nadler for his great leadership on this issue, and I'm really honored to join the heroes of this movement, great Congressman Barney Frank and Tammy Baldwin and Jared Polis, who I'm honored to join in this fight in the Congress of the United States, as well as many of our allies. This legislation will pass ultimately because the American people are demanding that we enact respect for marriage, because it really does reflect important values of this country. One, a deep, deep respect for the institution of marriage and what it means in a civil society, and a recognition that so much responsibility and so many rights and so many privileges are afforded to those who enjoy that institution. And secondly, a deeply held American value that prohibits discrimination. And so it's really those two things that will ultimately require us in the Congress of the United States, some of us enthusiastically, some of them begrudgingly, to enact this legislation, which is long overdue. We're in the midst of a fight for marriage equality in my home state in Rhode Island, and so this introduction of this legislation, I hope, will help propel passage of marriage equality in my state. And I'm proud to organizations who have contributed so much to building public support for marriage equality all across this country. This work could certainly not be done successfully without all of our partners, and so I'm proud to stand here today, obviously to support this Respect for Marriage Act, and to really, again, underscore that marriage equality is important because the time is long overdue for gay and lesbian couples to have full recognition for their relationships and to be included in the protections and obligations and full citizenship of civil marriage. Thank you.
Thank you. And now a man who needs no introduction, who has been fighting for equality and for justice since before many current members of Congress were born, the former and the next chairman of the Judiciary Committee, John Conyers.
Thank you, Jerry Nadler. I'm proud to associate myself with the remarks of everyone here. And when this bill is introduced this afternoon, I hope that names will be put in of the co-sponsors according to seniority. Sometimes a historic moment and a issue that has been pushed to the side, its time comes. And that's the moment that all the members of Congress, thanks to many of you here, have helped produce this moment in time, that we're going to take a large, honest, appropriate step forward in terms of the social relationships that should exist certainly on a much fairer basis than they have before now. And so it's with pleasure that I stand here with Jerry and Barney and Tammy and Jared and all of you in the activity that is going to go forward. And even in a conservative Congress, I think that the time is right. I don't think the fact that we're temporarily out of leadership changes anything, because there's nothing partisan about this. There really isn't anything political about this. It's a matter of common decency and good judgment. And so I stand here proudly with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce a pioneering lawyer and spectacular legal mind who has led the efforts in the court to bring an end to the horrendous discrimination caused by DOMA. Mary Bonato from the Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders. She will be introducing the amazing lead plaintiffs in one of her key cases. Mary?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Representative Nadler, and everyone for making this moment today possible. My name is Mary Bonato. I'm an attorney at Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders. It's a Boston-based legal organization. You can tell from our name what we do. GLAD has two pending federal court challenges to Section 3 of DOMA, the federal disrespect part. And the cases essentially say that DOMA's double standard, the singling out of only marriages, lawful marriages of same-sex couples for federal disrespect, is not only bad for families, but violates the promise of equal protection of the laws. In one case, in district court in Connecticut, called Peterson versus Office of Personnel Management, GLAD represents 6 married couples and a widower from the states of Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Each of these couples were denied some important protection: Social Security benefits upon death of a spouse, health insurance, pension benefits, family medical leave to care for a spouse during surgery, or were burdened by having to pay extra federal income taxes because they cannot file jointly. In Gill versus Office of Personnel Management, the case in Massachusetts, GLAD represents 7 couples and 3 widowers, all who have had similar problems. In the Massachusetts case, the plaintiffs won in federal district court in Boston last July, and an appeal is currently pending in the First Circuit. The judicial process, as Representative Nadler said, is going to take time, and that is time in which more people will be hurt by DOMA's nullification of their marriages for all federal purposes. So we are thrilled. We are totally thrilled. This is why we're here, to be here today, because we know that it's Congress that passed this law and Congress that can repeal it. And if any motivation is needed to do so, any further motivation, we have the experience of real people like Nancy Gill and Marcel Letourneau, ordinary people, but courageous people who have stepped forward and who now will step forward and tell you very concretely how DOMA has affected them and their family. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nancy Gill, and I've been an employee of the United States Postal Service for almost 24 years. I'm a distribution and window clerk. I'm here today with my spouse, Marcel Letourneau. We came from Bridgewater, Mass., which is a small college town south of Boston where we've lived since 1995. I met Marcel when I was a teenager, and I thought she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and I still do. We've been in a loving, committed relationship for 30 years, almost 7 of them as a married couple. We are also the proud parents of an 18-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. Our daughter is currently working on her college applications, and our son is busy with schoolwork, and he's getting ready to play another year of Little League Baseball. Marcel and I got married as soon as we were able to get a marriage license. Friday, May 21st, 2004, and we've been legally married. Our daughter and son were by our sides, and after 24 years, we were pretty sure we were ready to commit. We took our kids away for the weekend to celebrate. When I went to work the following Monday, I applied to put Marcel on myself and family health insurance plan, which already covered our kids and myself. I was very excited about finally getting to add Marcel to our family health insurance plan because it would help our family. We were paying for a separate health policy to cover Marcel. A couple weeks later, I received a letter denying my application because of DOMA. We did not know anything about DOMA. We were shocked and upset that our marriage wouldn't be treated the same as my coworkers. I work just as hard as my colleagues do at the post office. They're able to get health insurance and other benefits for their spouses, and I am not, even though I do the same job as they. Marcel?
DOMA puts economic burdens on us and has changed our life plan. At the time we married, we were planning for me to leave my job at a local nursing agency to be a stay-at-home parent for several years, to give all of us, and especially our children, a break from the juggling of balancing their needs with our 2 jobs. We know that not all families can afford it, but we were willing to sacrifice my income to do what was best for our family. But because of DOMA, we couldn't take this extra step to care for our children. I had to remain in the workforce in order to have access to health insurance. Being denied the benefit of my spouse's health insurance coverage makes me feel like my wife and our 2 children are in one category labeled family, and I am separate from them. DOMA takes our family and splits it apart.
Because of DOMA, we have spent over $7,000 from ourselves health insurance since 2004. I already pay for a family health policy at work, so we're paying for the same thing twice. These are a few of the reasons we're part of a lawsuit challenging DOMA, which denies hardworking married couples like us and our children the protections that all married couples count on. We'd like to thank Congressman Nadler for refiling the Respect of Marriage Act and working to make sure that the federal government treats Marcel and I the same way it treats my married coworkers at the post office. We look forward to the day when DOMA is gone and we can enjoy our married life together without some of the worry that DOMA creates. Thank you.
Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce a friend and another spectacular legal mind who, among other things, argued the marriage case in my home state of New York, and who has the good sense to be a partner at the firm where my son will soon be an associate. I don't know if that shows her good sense or Michael's good sense. Robbie Kaplan from Paul Weiss. Robbie will introduce her lead plaintiff, Edith Windsor, who is one of my constituents, and we will hear her amazingly moving story. Robbie?
I have the honor today of introducing my client and my hero, Edie Windsor. Let me tell you why Edie is such a hero. While we live today in a very different world, it is worth remembering that when Edie received her graduate degree in mathematics in the 1950s, no one, and I mean no one, could be openly gay and pursue a career in any but a very, very few professions. That's why, when her late spouse, Thea Spire, proposed to Edie, she did so with a circular brooch rather than a ring, so that Edie could wear it and not be out and risk what might happen if people knew that she was a lesbian. And Edie is wearing that diamond pin here today. Thea did that in 1967. You heard me correctly, 1967. That was before Stonewall. Take a moment and think about that. In 1967, the idea that two women would be able to get legally married to each other was simply beyond comprehension. That Thea and Edie had the inner conviction, the inner self-worth, the foresight, the self-esteem, and the bravery to get engaged in 1967 is one of the many, many reasons that Edie is such a hero. Another reason why Edie is such a hero is what happened for the next 40 years. The traditional vows of marriage, of course, talk about two people promising to have and to hold in sickness and health until death do us part. Edie and Thea truly lived those words in a way that would be a model to any couple, straight or gay. When Thea was diagnosed with the terrible disease of multiple sclerosis in 1977, a disease that ultimately led to her paralysis, the diagnosis happened to both of them. Edie cared for Thea in ways that extended from the ordinary, like feeding and bathing her, or helping to feed and bathe her, to the extraordinary, like writing special software so that Thea could use the computer and help to care for her patients. She worked as a psychologist. All of these were acts of everyday heroism. If and when any of us in this room get to the point where we lose the love of our life, the way that Edie did, we all deserve to be treated with dignity. No one should have to pay a $363,000 estate tax bill simply because they were married to a woman instead of a man. That is why we are here today. Whether it happens as a result of the case that we filed together with the ACLU and the NYCLU on Edie's behalf in federal court in New York, or it happens as a result of the legislation being introduced in Congress today, DOMA needs to end, and it needs to end as soon as possible. I'd like to thank my congressman, Representative Nadler, the other congressmen and congresswomen here today for reintroducing the very aptly named Respect for Marriage Act, which will repeal the very unaptly named Defense of Marriage Act once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, I'm Edie Windsor, and I'm here as a person whose life has been adversely impacted by DOMA, as have the lives of so many others. My late spouse, Thea Spire, and I lived together and loved each other for more than 4 decades. We began dating in 1965, became engaged in 67 with this diamond brooch, and stayed engaged for 40 years, in love with and caring for each other, sharing all the joys and sorrows that came our way. During those times, as any couple does, we lived through good times, each with jobs that we loved, great friends, and dancing. God, we danced. And we also lived through the vicissitudes of aging and illness. In 1977, Thea was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, the progressive type. First 1 cane, then 2 crutches, wheelchairs, and the last year's quadriplegia. We felt lucky that MS didn't affect her brilliant mind or her cognition. 1996, I had emergency coronary bypass surgery. Then in 2002, Thea's aortic stenosis. And still we lived and enjoyed our life together, and still we danced. In 2007, Thea had a year to live prognosis, and we realized we were running out of time and decided to marry immediately. In those 40-some years, we never thought of ourselves as single. So what could be different? It didn't occur to us that people would see us differently as a legally married couple, but they did. When our wedding announcement ran in the New York Times, we heard from literally hundreds of people from every stage in our lives, playmates and schoolmates, colleagues, friends, and relatives, all pouring out love and congratulations because we were married. Marriage, as you all know, is an institution that means so much to so many. It represents the ultimate expression of love and commitment between 2 people. And everyone understands that. In the whole world, everyone understands that. When my beautiful, sparkling Thea died 2 years ago, I was overcome with grief. Within a month, I was hospitalized with a heart attack. In the midst of this, I had to spend countless hours defending our marriage to the federal government. Because of DOMA, I was forced to pay $363,000 in federal estate tax that I would not have had to pay had I been married to a man, even if I had met the man and married the man 2 days before he died. While New York State considered us married, the federal government taxed what I had inherited from Thea as though we were strangers. I'm 81 years old and live on a fixed income, and paying that tax was not easy for me. Because of my overwhelming sense of unfairness and injustice, I decided to bring a lawsuit in federal court in New York challenging DOMA as unconstitutional and seeking the return of that tax that I was forced to pay as a result of DOMA. DOMA, as we've all referred to it, the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, excludes same-sex couples from fully participating in marriage, and that is unfair. And it excludes gay people from the ability to protect their spouse when one of them dies, and that is unfair. All marriages should be treated equally in the eyes of the law. President Obama and the Department of Justice recently agreed with the merits of my lawsuit and announced that they would no longer defend the constitutionality of DOMA. House Speaker Boehner, however, disagrees and has said he will retain counsel to defend it. So it looks like right now my legal fight is far from over. But hearing the people in this room and knowing what's being introduced today, I think our chances for the defeat of DOMA are more and more possible, and it's thrilling to be here and to meet all these heroes. Thank you.
I guess someone might take it there. Yeah. Thank you very much. I would now like to introduce, and it's going to be hard to top what we just heard. I'd now like to introduce Joe Salmonese of the Human Rights Campaign. Good luck, Joe.
Thank you. I'll top that by being brief. How's that? Thank you, Congressman Nadler, Congressman Conyers, and Frank, Baldwin, Polis, and Cicilline. You know, when DOMA was passed 15 years ago, there were no married same-sex couples in this country. And so the idea, the discrimination that we were talking about at the time was abstract, was hypothetical. And what I hope you have heard today from Edie and from Nancy and from Marcel is the real-life implications in the denial of marriage equality for same-sex couples in this country. I think that more than anything else over the last few years, couples in this country having the opportunity not just to be married, but to really feel empowered to be out and open about who they are, about the stories of their lives, and in particular, the inequities that they face in their lives are, to my way of thinking, what, as Congresswoman Baldwin mentioned in a recently released HRC poll, shows that only 34% of the American people agree with DOMA. I think they're hearing stories from couples all across the country, workers who have to pay into Social Security their entire lives, but have a surviving spouse be denied those benefits simply because that spouse is a man. Two women building a life together, but one is a foreign national, and because her spouse can't sponsor her for immigration, they're forced to choose between love and country. An employee's wife falls ill, but she cannot take unpaid leave to care for her because the Family and Medical Leave Act does not cover same-sex couples. The spouse of lesbian gay people who serve so valiantly in uniform excluded from military family benefits. The debate over DOMA isn't actually about whether you favor marriage equality. It's about whether the government can pick and choose which marriages they like and which ones they don't. So the Respect for Marriage Act would simply remedy this injustice by repealing DOMA and restoring the rights of all lawfully married couples, including same-sex couples, to receive the benefits under law that they are entitled to. Today, for the first time, as you heard, the Senate will also introduce the Respect for Marriage Act, and I want to thank Senators Feinstein, Leahy, and Gillibrand for their leadership, because together with them and the House champions here today, we are going to build on this historic support for DOMA repeal and end this institutionalized discrimination against same-sex couples in this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It's now my pleasure to introduce Evan Wolfson of Freedom to Marry.
Thank you. I too shall be not just short, but brief. In the United States, we do not have second-class citizens, and we should not have second-class marriages. Couples like Edie and Thea, Marcel and Nancy, who have made a commitment in life, who are doing the work of marriage day to day through life's ordinary ups and downs and through times of crisis, who've made that commitment in life, should not have a discrimination against them under the law, but should share the equal commitment under the law that we in the United States call civil or legal marriage. To be excluded from marriage, as we've heard today, is a personal and real hardship. It is an indignity, and it is a manifest injustice when it is discrimination practiced directly by the government. The federal government should respect marriages and should not have a gay exception to the way it treats marriages with the respect they are due. Government has no interest in destabilizing families rather than protecting them. At the same time, we all know that with the wonderful champions we see today in the House, in the Senate, this work will not do itself. The President of the United States has called for overturning DOMA. A majority of the American people want this discrimination to end. And we, organizations, individuals, gay and non-gay, must take action to give these members of Congress the calls, the arguments, the contacts, the information, and the impetus they need to get this job done, to remove this discrimination from the books, and to put the United States back where it needs to be, leading the world in human rights, leading our nation in respect, and removing obstacles from the path of people seeking to care for one another in tough times with the respect and dignity we all deserve under our Constitution.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Richard Socarides of Equality Matters.
Thanks, Jerry. Thank you all, and thank you to my congressman. I not only work on these issues here, but Jerry is also my congressman. Really inspirational stories, and there's not much to add. I perhaps may be the only person in this room with the dubious distinction of actually having been there when this horrific law was signed back in 1996 as an aide to President Clinton. And I think it's quite remarkable. This is an important day going forward where we can say this was the day that we moved forward to repeal this law. President Clinton, has long backed repeal of this law, thanks to the urging that Congressman Nadler, the conversations he had with Congressman Nadler last time when this was introduced, and we read a statement from him. There's great leadership in this room. We're excited, and we think this is an important day going forward. Thanks for everybody for being here.
Thank you, Richard. And finally, Ray Carey of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force.
Thank you, Congressman Nadler. And other members of Congress, earlier Congressman Conyers said there is a time and a moment, and we are in that moment. And let us not let that moment last too long. And Edie, let us make your generation the last generation that experiences the injustices and indignities that have been put upon you. You have our commitment, all of our colleagues up here, that we will make it so, and to our children, that we will not let this fight be their fight. We will partner with our members in Congress and make sure that we move forward in progress for this country for loving couples. Thank you.